Testing. We're going to start. What a fantastic turnout once again. What an absolute relief for me and for everybody who's put this together. So, because you never know. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Art Week Riyadh, public program day 3. My name is Shuman Basar. I've curated the public talks and special workshops, which are powered by Zawaya wa Afkar, the first dedicated ideas platform for visual arts in the kingdom, organized by the Visual Arts Commission. My deepest thanks to the huge team who've brought all of this together. I'm sure you can all imagine how much effort goes into something like this. So I've given the 2025 public program the title, How to Art World, Lessons in Value. It brings together some of the most important gallerists, collectors, curators, critics, and culture makers to share their unique expertise in building meaningful arts infrastructures and ask the question, what different kinds of value, economic, social, historical, symbolic, does all of this generate for now and for the future? This evening marks the third of 8 public talks. It's called Why Do Collectors Collect? And our guests are Basma Al Sulaiman, Josh Baer, Raneem Farsi, Maria Sukkar, and it's hosted by Alia Senussi. This discussion looks at the impulses, intuitions, and strategies of collecting art, which vary from collector to collector, collection to collection. Some collections are born from the passions of curious individuals. Others are inherited within families, redefined by each successive generation. What makes a meaningful and relevant collection approach? So Alia will introduce each of the guests in more detail, but I had the pleasure of introducing Dr. Alia Senussi. The short version would be, she's a phenomenon. And I could end my description there, and it would be accurate, factually accurate. But let me also add a few other details, and this is by no means comprehensive. Alia has served as Art Basel's UK and MENA representative for over a decade. In 2019, she was appointed senior advisor to the Ministry of Culture here in Saudi Arabia, where she focuses on developing international partnerships, whilst working on a variety of projects across the ministry's commissions and the Diriyah Biennial Foundation. Alia is also a visiting, is this still correct tense-wise, a visiting lecturer at Brown University Watson Institute, working with the Middle East Studies program. And she recently published a book co-authored with Rebecca Ann Proctor entitled Art in Saudi Arabia, A New Creative Economy. Just a couple of things before I hand over to Alia and our guests. After this talk, we have a very special workshop with Gagosian, and that's at 8 o'clock, with Pepe and Amira who are going to talk about everything that you didn't think Gagosian is about, but is. And I think that'll be an amazing session. And then there's a book launch with Canvas at 9 o'clock. And just to let you know that at Ather Gallery, which is in warehouse H21, there's a special gathering from 8:30 p.m. onwards, featuring music by Cosmic Cat. And Mohammed asked me to invite you all there this evening. With that, please will you join me in welcoming our guests, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuman, and thank you to all of our wonderful guests for being here. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces as well as new ones, and I think that will really help, kind of put the talk into context of, why we're here, why do collectors collect, how do we art world, and these are all really important questions here at Riyadh Art Week. And this has been long in the making, and I think probably one of my very first conversations at the ministry was with Princess Adwa, who, knew that there was this desire and that this need to put the idea of collecting into the conversation of these incredible projects happening in Saudi, because fundamentally, collecting is about supporting artists and about supporting the cultural community at its very fundamental building block. And we know that artists can't make their work, they can't pay their rent, they can't, function in their studios without collectors who support them. And so I want to say, thank you to the incredible gallerists that we have here, because you are also that, I'm a huge believer in the gallery system, and part of my work with Art Basel is very much about that. And I think that galleries are that perfect interlocutor, not always perfect, but very much part of that conversation in a really key way. So, as Shumon very kindly gave us a brief intro, and I'm not going to talk about each of our speakers because I think, they are the reason you're all here. So I'm sure you all know, and the reason we have such a full room is because their reputations precede them. Because we're here in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia at this moment, we want to start with Basma Al Sulaiman. And, this is going to be quite a free-flowing conversation. And so if you have questions actually during the talk, I really welcome you to raise your hands, and, we'll try to weave them into the conversation, because I would like that. And so many of you actually know our speakers really well, so you probably have better questions than I do as we move along. But I wanted to start with Basma and talk about your journey in collecting, and as somebody who started collecting all types of art, and of course has been a big believer and patron of Saudi art, and especially with your work with the Saudi Art Council, and then now at the Ministry of Culture, sitting on various boards. But you have been very international in your scope and in the way you look at things, and also really embracing new technologies from early moments.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and I'm very pleased to be here today, especially first in the first Riyadh Art Week, and I'm looking forward to many to come. Well, usually when I speak in interviews, I talk about how I started, what I collected, the timeline, and so on. But today I would like to approach it from a different angle. I would like to speak about what shaped my collection. And it is very important to know what have impacted me during my journey. I started collecting various artwork, but specifically without a huge background or knowledge. I wanted a collection that represent me, my values, my way of looking at life, and my challenges. We all have challenges, we have all experiences that differs from one to the other. And these are the ones that should be translated in a collection rather than being a collection of trend. So I ended up buying at early age. For the past 30 years I've been collecting, but at the beginning just using my instinct and my kind of driven by my passion, my curiosity, but not a lot of knowledge.
Your interest in travel also. I mean,
Yeah.
You're somebody who is unbelievably well-traveled and, who enjoys looking at art from different parts of the world and reflecting that at home.
Exactly, and that's why I have two parallel collections. I have one Saudi focus, Saudi collection, and I have international global perspective one. And I've been collecting them separately. But at a moment of time, as time passed, and especially with the major transformation that happened from 2016, I see it merging together. And because they merge together because of the recurring themes that I've always been drawn to. And this is one of the reasons is that I have the Saudi with all, the influences of my tradition, my religion, my experiences, my heritage is one collection. And then you have the other collection, which is a more of artistic expression, more of a global look at art, of an understanding of different way of practicing art. So both collections now are merging as one, which makes much more sense. And there are a lot of similarity in this. But that's one of the reasons that I would like to say is that the core of the collection is very much myself. I never had an advisor. I never worked with advisor. It was me. I picked each and every piece. I wanted it to be something that talks to me. I believe is that a collection shouldn't be this. It has to be a journey, a travel of a human experience.
And we're seeing work.
And now this is like what I would like to start with are these two pieces. One which is for Zahra Al-Ghamdi, which is explains exactly my collection. One which is Zahra Al-Ghamdi that talks about, it's called From Here We Start. So this is the beginning of myself, of my country, and how we branched out.
And I think many of you in the audience will have remembered Zahra Al-Ghamdi's presentation representing Saudi Arabia at the Venice Biennale. And it was very reminiscent and kind of related to this series. And you can also see that work at Final Awal in the diplomatic quarter installed in the sculpture garden.
Yeah,
some of you already know this, but I'm giving it to the whole audience.
Yeah, this was the first actually work she did. That was it. And it represents Saudi Arabia and the different parts of it and all the branching out. The other one is a very personal one. It's for Dana Awartani, and it's called, it's from the series of Grief. And this represents a personal experience for me where I lost my son. Then we move to another similarity in the collection, which is I have one Chinese, Zhou Zhenqi, and I have Richter on the other side. And both of them were bought at different times. But again, you see the recurring themes in the collection. And this is, of course, here I would like just to emphasize how much Venice was a major factor, in my collecting path.
And I think that we can, say, and again, I'm speaking to, different parts of the audience here, and of course we all understand the kind of importance of Venice Biennale, and also the importance of these kind of major international exhibitions. And, through our own experiences here with where actually Riyadh Art Week is happening with the Diriyah Contemporary Art Biennale, the Islamic Arts Biennale in Jeddah, but seeing works on a very large scale by artists, but then also works that you can take home and collect. For example, the work by Zahra Al-Ghamdi was reflected in a very different way in Venice. And actually that's something that we'll talk, I think, a little bit more with Maria about in terms of institutional collecting as opposed to private collecting and how we choose different things from our own experiences on acquisitions committees at institutions rather than what you would take home with you.
Yeah, so Venice has impacted as well my path, and then I bought like this Anatsui, which was covering part of a series that was covering the Palazzo Fortuny in Venice. And then we have this, which is again, it's Joana Vasconcelos with Mahal Mallouh. They are, like totally different works, but all of them represent sculptural work, sculpture art that is more like, it's a painting, but in a sculptural form. And then we have Dana Awartani, which is again the same thing, monumental size, but in a it's a scroll, but also it looks like a sculpture. Then we have Daniel Buran and Rashid Shashai, which is again illumination of space. You have a bit of architecture in there, and then like the stripes, the geometric design, and so on. Here is a very interesting piece, which is for Zhang Huan called Skin. And you have the Filwa Nazar, which is called The Skin I Live Within. And both of them represent memories, but one on the skin and one on the body. This is like Noha Sharif with the terracotta, a warrior from Yumen. Again, we're talking about the same thing. This is Baselitz and Yumen. Again, the similarity, what I'm trying to say here is that whatever challenges our artists had or artists in the world, there is another person somewhere else is doing the same. This is Alia Ahmed with Mahamat, African. This is Lulu Al-Hamoud, and this is, of course, Faith, which plays a very important part in my collection, which is Abdel Nasser and Ahmed, you know, both
Who
of
are
them.
both in the audience with us. Thank you for being here.
Okay. This is just a brief to give you exactly, you know, the different path I took during my life in order to collect, but all driven by my own kind of personal experience.
And just one question before we kind of move into a larger conversation, but in terms of the work you do as a collector, because of course it is, you know, you can tell, you know, you put a great amount of research into it, you're really looking at themes that speak to you and artists and following them. You know, you have multiple works by multiple artists within your collection. How does that also, you think, speak to this moment and the work you're doing, for example, sitting on various boards at the ministry, the work you've done as a patron to support those artists in Saudi Arabia, like that conversation?
Yeah, it is very important to connect, you know, to connect the artist with the scene that is happening. Now we have a very flourishing scene in Saudi Arabia, and I see there is a lot of initiatives, a lot of people individually are doing, you know, different things, and institutional and governmental, and all of it links together. All of it leads to the same thing, which is the promotion of art and artists, but the good art, after all. You know, like, honestly, you know, I have to say that, you know.
As I always say, there are different art worlds.
Yes, yeah, but we're not going to compromise. You know, like we're demanding quality and education. You know, like there is a trend that, you know, education is not important. That's not true. Education is very important. And this is the measure and the base for any art or artist.
Mm-hmm. And Maria, I think, you know, also, you know, all of our speakers actually are hybrid roles, you know, as patron collector, institutional involvement especially. And I think with you, I'd love to talk about your collection, but also really the context of how your collection plays the role. You sit on multiple boards in London, you support multiple institutions, not least of which is as co-chair of the Tate Middle East North African Acquisitions Committee, alongside Faisal Tamar, of course, a noted Saudi collector and figure as well. And you've sat since the founding on the Tate Committee, amongst others. And so maybe explain that role as a private collector, but also believing in the power of the institution to support contemporary art and artists.
So, hi everyone, thank you for coming. To start off, I will just pick up from where Basma left about the values of the collectors and what it represents to us to buy artwork. And she said that she buys works that align with her values, and I couldn't agree more, because I strongly think that this is where it all starts from. You buy things that you like, but at the end of the day, they align with your values. But for me also, artwork is my opening to the world, and I see the world through the eyes of the artists I collect the works of. Yes, I do like to live with beautiful works around me at the house or at my husband's office, but the way that I see my life is through the works of these artists. So for me, for example, someone who believes like me in communication, in love, in connection, all the works that I collect speak about love and connection. They speak about this expansiveness, this communication between different populations and different nationalities. And that's why my collection is quite international.
And what's your collection called? So
My collection is called I Self, and it's the combination of the I and the self. It has existentialism at its core, and it deals with the human condition. So that's why it's called the I Self.
And you've been and I welcome you all actually to Google Maria and Google, a series of articles and interviews you've given, and you've really delved very deep into the personal aspect, which we've, just heard, and thank you for sharing. Basma, you're also very personal stories that can be, of course, difficult, but through art, perhaps therapeutic. And I think, Maria, you talked about this in the recent Art Basel article and also the recent Frieze article last year. And I think that was very important for you to kind of delve into. Also that you're very open and, I think we all, unfortunately abuse Maria and turn to her for every event at her home, and she opens her home. And that's a very important aspect for, I think, what happens in Saudi. And somebody, once remarked to me last year when they came for the Biennale, and they said that they'd never been welcome to so many people's homes anywhere else in the world as when they were here. And that's very much part of Saudi culture, but it's also very much part of, I think, the Middle Eastern London community. And Maria is one of them. So the idea of welcoming people to your home and talking to them about that in the idea of your collection and institutionally.
Up until recently, a lot of people didn't know much about our Middle Eastern heritage. But they knew a few names, of course. But once they come into your house and they see what you collect and they eat Lebanese food, they start understanding who you are. Food is very important in our culture, everyone knows. And Middle Eastern people are known for their hospitality. This is what we do. We open our homes for people, for guests to come. We greet them, we drink, we eat, we share with them everything. Our happiness, our tears, our sorrows, our laughter, our excitement. So I think it's my culture that gives me this edge to being able to open my home and share with people. But also, I love to share what I have with everyone else. So I love to share my experiences, and I also love to share the art that we collect, especially that my collection has an international focus, with a strong focus on women, I should mention that. And then very recently, Alia and I started hosting artists from the Middle East, allowing them to come and speak about their work, their experiences, who they are, where they come from. And this allowed the audience in London, because I'm based in London for those who don't know, to look at us in a different way, and then wanting to be more curious and ask more questions. How does this work? Oh, so Saudi is different than Lebanese, or Kuwaiti is different than Syrian. The art is different, the names are different, the food is different. And I think our role as collectors is not only to just show the art, but also to share our culture through the art. And I think this is where the edge is.
And Josh, coming at this from a decidedly perhaps non-Middle Eastern perspective, and as our sole gentleman, but also our sole New Yorker on the panel, I think what we're seeing also of your images, and so the images are being looped, and you just see the kind of owner of the images, Maria and Josh, on the screen. But Josh, you are a noted art advisor. You are a noted art world figure. Your newsletter is infamous and famous.
Notorious.
Notorious. And, kind of thinking about this is your first time here to Saudi Arabia. And I read what you said a couple of weeks ago, that you came with an open mind. But perhaps just put this idea of collecting in the context of a very established art market like New York. What does collecting mean in communities and circles of power? How do collectors, for example, their signal values, and we know this is a very fraught time for that, and especially in New York and other places. And I think Shimon's question about me still being at Brown was a very sentient one. So I think kind of that very New York idea of collecting power artists.
Thank you for having me. And I'll do a sort of lightning round of a lot of points. First of all, it's a mistake for me to come and think that what we do in New York or what we do in America or the West is the one way to do things. We think it's right for us, but it doesn't mean that it is globally. I found that a lot in traveling through other parts of Asia, or that a Richter painting means the same thing to me as it means to you. We've had this notion that it's universal in meaning. I think that's a mistake. And it's a mistake that New Yorkers and Westerners make when they go someplace. Other points I would make is there's a difference between a collector and a collection. There are many great collections that don't have great collectors. And there are many great collectors who may not have such great collections. They're very different. And understanding that, as a gallerist, which I'm a reformed one, or an advisor, which I do, it's like, they're not identical. And for me, I was raised by artists. So I come from a world where art was made and left. So no collecting there, there's just, it's gone, okay? And then I wound up running a nonprofit because money wasn't a big thing in the art world, 45 years ago. And then suddenly the art market happened. It's the major phenomenon of the 21st in the late 20th century. It's not Cubism or Abex. The major ism, the last one, is the art market. So suddenly it's really about money, okay? That's the sort of canary in the mine shaft. And when you're working on things, it's like, and professionally, you have to pay attention to those things. I mean, the images that we're showing, that's a Chris Burton sculpture that I saw took place in Inhotim in Brazil. Maybe it'll lose its place as the greatest new art spot in the world to what's coming in Saudi. It'll probably be number 2. Artists that I've loved, like African-American artists like David Hammond's there. I'm showing Guatemala Clark because when I did a show at the gallery, no one even asked the price. And he's a major international artist, and it's pretty hard. There's some gallerists sitting in here to be there 6 weeks with no one saying, how much is it? Now these things are incredibly valuable at the time, and those are the things I'm most proud of, are some of the things that failed. So that's Joseph Beuys, and I think for each of us, that's the artwork that changed my life at a certain moment of understanding, growing up with pop art and minimal art and all these isms. Suddenly, Joseph Beuys, what was that? I was 23, and it totally threw me off. So that's that sense of discovery and otherness that I think is important. And my last point is, like the great collections, they have a narrative. They tell a story. Now, a museum, when they do it, they need to stick to that. And a great collector says, here's my story, except I like this thing too. And you have that freedom to, like, I only collect, there's a great photo collection just of hands. This guy's shown at the Guggenheim, I think they own it. And that's great to do, but every so often there's my, Richard Serra sculpture. So that's my lightning round.
Thank you for that. I think just one thing before we return to Raneem. You mentioned Inhotim, and I think that's a huge kind of subject that we can open up here, and especially actually talk to Raneem as well about Al-Ala, and that Inhotim and places like it. I've had really the privilege of visiting, and it is unbelievably special. And it was made by this mad man in Brazil who comes out of a Werner Herzog movie.
Well, you have to understand that labor was so cheap there that that's the place where they could do anything.
So Inhotim is in Minas Gerais, which is a very rich in mineral state of Brazil. And it has almost no city. It's very difficult to find anywhere to stay or get there. So just think of a real Brazilian jungle.
But thousands of people go there every day. And it's like Jurassic Park for art. And every artwork would have its own building. And it's like, and I see what you're doing, that it's like, I've seen some projects that are in the news or coming. It's like, that could not be done anyplace else in the world for the commitment of time, space, and money.
And so Raneem, last but not least, so you are also this hybrid person, and who I have known for all through the iterations of both of our lives over 24 years, if we can imagine. And I'd love to talk to you about collecting, but I'd love to talk to you about your role as a curator, as an advisor, and as looking at these projects and how they can also be in conversation to each other of how one supports artists through institutional collections or institutional patronage, and the work you do in different ways of collections.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum jami'an. First of all, it's an honor for me to be amongst great collectors, advisors, and yourself. I mean, it's a huge question. It's a role, I think, that transforms from being derived by passion and becomes more of a responsibility, where I feel like, we start looking at it as building legacies rather than building assets, in the way where you start building meaning more so than building just value. And I feel like that's what's been happening so far, and it becomes more of like the cultural preservation becomes the motive behind whether it's institutional collections, whether it's even with private collections here that really are looking at it from a sense of commitment and contribution rather than just I just want to buy this because will it appreciate in value at one point, and it becomes more of, do I want to preserve this to stay within my country? Do I need, like, national patriotism comes in role, but then also you have this whole, I need to build this legacy to remain here and to build more of like either a national collection, either to showcase this within the country, education obviously, to allow this to be a resource for the locals to understand how this whole scene came about, what came before, obviously modern artists, how they started building this, and you start building a narrative and the story becomes complete. There's a starting point to your story rather than just seeing these artworks that, as Josh said, oh, what is this form? What is this medium? How did it come about? Where, and really know what the kind of timeline of the let's say Saudi art practice, where did it initiate? And then really just kind of put sense into how about, and the approach to it really is with institutions or with private, it's really looking at what, anchoring identity rather than just, following trend or follow the market. And because at the end of the day, it could be, Saudi art is trendy. We cannot run away from this fact lately with, these works in auction houses. But then also with that comes speculators. Yeah, and then more bubbles come into and then you get more interest from, whether it's institutions or other collectors and not only Saudis, where they come in and you know that the aim of that is to flip at one point, or, we want to buy this. But then you really try to infuse the fact that, there is a very, very important aspect of preservation to that. Look at the meaning more so than just looking at it as an asset. And it's as a market, at its infancy, it's very hard to come and say, oh, well, it will appreciate by this percentage at this point. And, I try to avoid that. And I think what I've been noticing here with either the projects or institutions, really everyone's looking at meaning, looking to build
And
legacy.
It's not just Saudi artists, it's about putting Saudi artists in conversation with
international ones, again, because that's why I said you can either have it as building a national, collection and building that, but then you also have this conversation that, personal efforts like Basma that you mentioned, by putting, we all face the same challenges. Our artists are expressing the same subject matters that other artists are expressing abroad. It's just knowing how to have, where's Muhammad Hafiz? How to have a perfect juxtaposition in this matter, and to have that conversation is, having the eye for it. And I feel like that's what we are trying to do here, is also to allow Saudi artists to gain from international, exposure, promotion, as they've mentioned, but also really preserve. This is all cultural heritage. It's all very important to tell our story, to tell our narrative through a language that everyone understands.
Yeah, Maria, you were going to ask something? Oh.
Hello? Yeah. I forgot to touch upon my involvement in various institutions, but I can leave that to you when it's time.
Perfect. And Josh? Oh, Josh has a question.
Listen, there's 3 million artists in America. And there are more artists in America than lawyers. Okay? So I'm a little concerned that there's a sense here, like in Holland, they supported every artist, and the government had warehouses full of art. And they gave almost a living stipend to every single artist. And what they realized is the artists were like, well, I can be an artist, who cares how good it is, I'll just be there. So this is a slippery slope that you're at a nascent period of trying to embrace your culture and your history without any sort of like other parameters. And if the government is too involved, I mean, there's great opportunity and support, but on the other hand, you know, I would say, unfortunately, art, if you look at it as an asset, then you might pay attention to your choices that you're making. Not that it's necessarily going to go up in value, but it'll have historical value. So you can look at it as an asset, not just as a financial asset, but a cultural asset. And I don't think there's a responsibility, you know, art collecting was a bit of patronage a long time ago. And that ship has sailed in most of the world. And that's a great motive, and there's great opportunities for philanthropy in all sorts of ways, including the art. But I think we should pay attention to an objective standard too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why it's not, if I base it solely on financial assets, yeah, you don't necessarily need to just have financial capital. I feel like a lot of people abuse the word capital. Look at it from an emotional capital, yeah? What is your kind of emotional connection to it? And when I say emotional, whether it's private, that's why I said private and institutional meaning governmental and beyond. I'm not just saying governments will support and acquire, but also we have individuals that are acquiring, whether they're Saudis acquiring Saudi work. And there's a lot of things that are happening in the pipeline, because whether it's museums that are being established, works are not going to be bought and put in warehouses. They're being bought as part of strategies to be showcased, to be, you know, being on loan with other...
Museums fill up, and that's the challenge. MoMA, the basement of MoMA, which is actually in New Jersey, has, you know, 25,000 objects, and there's 100 on view. Maria wants to disagree with me, so I like this.
How did you know? May I, Alia? Yes. Can I go?
Yes, please.
What would you do? What do you do when governments fail? Or I'm going to give you two examples. So I'm Lebanese, but I live in London. And in both cases, there are not enough funds to support the artists. In the UK, the government has placed a lot of cuts on there are cuts in the budgets on all art institutions. And I know that because I sit on the board of many and on acquisition committees. So if it weren't for the individual efforts and donations of the very few that haven't left because they have just, I'm not going to go into the whole non-dom thing. There's a crisis. Artists are not able to go into residency to produce art. Museums cannot function or buy work. In Lebanon, it's the opposite. We've had a bad situation, let's say, for many, many years. And again, the country is surviving solely because we have amazing people we call philanthropists, whether in the charitable sector or in the art sector, that are generously contributing to the general sort of effort. So what do you do if you're saying that that ship has sailed?
Okay.
Go.
So education is a different thing to support like the growth of art and artists, right? I think we can all agree that's a great use of every country's resources, okay? So we're together on this. Then I would say it's up to artists to create their own modes of being. It's like there used to be something called alternative spaces, artist-run spaces. There are artists who got together and they found a warehouse, they did a show, and
So
they found their own opportunities.
So
and that's
on both points, then we can move on to a different topic. Actually, 16 years ago, I did a talk at Ahmed Mater's studio in Jeddah at the time. And it was one of the very first talks that was publicized on Facebook. And it was quite tricky to do, mixed, men and women talk at a private artist studios, semi-public. And one of the first things was everyone in the audience. It was fathers bringing their daughters. And it was just me and Ahmed in conversation. And it was one of the first things I said was, not all of you should be artists. Try to be a gallerist. You know, one of the great gallerists in the world, Josh, as you know, is Arnie Glimcher, who went to art school and realized he was not a great artist compared to his classmates, and then became a great gallerist. But I think that is, you know, I agree with you. Not everyone should be an artist. But also, what about the Works in Progress Administration? I mean, the WPA, you know, in the United States, I welcome all of you. I used this actually in my very early days at the Ministry of Culture in our conversations, talking about what a great government can do to support the arts in perpetuity.
I'm sure you'll go to Basma, but if you have the wrong people in power who are trying to take away your culture and trying to impose a narrow view of culture and removing culture, which is the world I'm living in now, then you've got the other side of it, and that's what scares me.
One question that I would like as well to add is here, how do we apply all this to us, to Saudi Arabia? What is the point that kind of like connect everything? And I think we need the collectors, we need the patrons, we need the artists, we need everybody. We're in a different stage. We're not, you know, like we cannot be compared yet to the rest of the world. You know, I think we are we're just starting our evolution, and we are now, there is another, Josh just earlier said it was about patronage and it's finished. It's here, it's about preservation. We need to preserve what we have to start from there. Otherwise, we cannot just say it's today. We have to preserve what we have. We have to build on it. We have to expand it. We have to be all united at this moment to make, you know, like the government does its role, but it's not enough.
Well, I think, you know, very much at the, you know, kind of the fundamental reason for Riyadh Art Week and for this talk in particular is to encourage the Saudi public and encourage the idea of collecting. And I think, you know, we see very few examples of that so far, you know, and it's nascent and entering the market. But I know from, you know, the galleries want more collectors. They need more collectors. Artists need more collectors here. So I encourage everyone, and also not to think, you know, about, you were saying about, you know, value. And, you know, so many of your works, of course, are worth a great deal now. But, I mean, some of them were very young artists. And it was, and, you know, there are famous stories, and Josh, you know, talks about them in his article often of, you know, the famous mailman in New York who, you know, built this incredible collection, you know, on a mailman's salary.
His wife was equal, and she was a librarian. There's a film on them called The Vogels. They were all about this tall, and they gave their collection to 50 different museums across America. So that's a story that couldn't happen again. But if you look up Herb and Dorothy Vogel.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note something, because Josh, you've been mentioning, you know, if you have the wrong people, again, you're looking at it from an angle of where, you know, you stand, whether it's in New York and in America. And as Basma said, we're in completely kind of different viewpoint and a different angle and a different standpoint in where we are today. You know, looking back at when the sculptural park was actually built back in the 70s, it started off as a governmental initiative, but then it went, and the mayor at the time actually went to the families of Jeddah, asking them to support this initiative to diversify people's attention from the development, the city development that was happening. And today we have more than 700 sculptures that are in the city of Jeddah that no other city around the world has. That is an asset, but it was built as a legacy. It was built for its meaning, for its cultural, you know, meaning and cultural asset rather than financial asset at the time, that then added value to the city of Jeddah, to the people of Jeddah, to educating them kind of in a very kind of natural way, because we had kind of the right person in the right place. And I think we're going through the same movement today Fast forward from the 70s till today, thankfully, we have the right people in the right spots. We have governmental support, but we also have individual initiatives that have been happening, like the Saudi Art Council that happened over 10 years ago. Other individual, initiatives that have been happening from the artists themselves. And I see no harm by having a top-bottom and a bottom-top approach where you meet at midpoint. And in kind of a demographic like ours, that we're trying to find the best formula that works for us. And I feel whether it's collecting and people feel shy, people feel they don't understand the art world and how can I start collecting? And I think what we're trying to do here is to allow for, it's a trial and error, collect this, start with what you can, whether you're an individual or even an institution, there are many motives. And as Basma said, we have to take patriotism into account. We have to look at it because these are national treasures for us. And once we allow people, international collectors are collecting from, our artists, whether contemporary or modern ones. But where do we stand if we don't have
well,
the baseline?
Most great markets, and I think Josh, we'd say that, they start with at-home collectors. But we're not quite there yet in Saudi, but this is a part of that narrative.
You'd be surprised. Many do not mention. I was very surprised, Alia, when I was doing my thesis over 2008. I've interviewed a lot of collectors, Basma's one of them, and many Saudis who do not mention their names, and at the time because they just felt, they were scared to mention their collections, or they just didn't feel like it was necessary to mention that, they have this collection. And some of them have great international collections, not only Saudi collections. So you'd be surprised. I feel like with now people are coming out and speaking more of what they have because contribution comes into place,
And we have a question from the audience.
Two questions, if you don't mind. Thank you for the talk. My father gave us some of his art work, and so we're basically taking care of it for him, and hopefully we'll pass it on or whatever. My question is to sort of the panel. What is your advice to collectors once they collect and they have a good collection, longer term? Because I attend a lot of auctions and they say, this is the artwork of the deceased X or Y and Z, we buy it, or people give it to museums. Okay. What are some of your ideas to preserve that for the long term? That's question one. Question two is, if you guys, God forbid, if your collection were to burn and you had to just take one painting out, what would it be? Thank you.
Basma, maybe for you, I think to answer the first question, really, because you think a lot about legacy, and that's a big topic we've discussed.
For me, legacy is very important, and I'm a strong believer to give back. And I think it's a responsibility of a collector not only to collect and keep it to himself or herself, it is to share it. And sharing is important, and giving back is important. In my opinion, and I strongly believe in that, it has to be donated nationally. This is something, is a must. Part of it, or even if you cannot let go of all of it, and you want to share, give some to your children as well, to continue the journey, you have to, because if we look at other countries everywhere, it is important to give to the nation. It is important to be part of that. It's really, like, as we all travel and we all go to a museum and you see the wing of this, the wing of that, and so on. And all these people have contributed to that and contributed to the journey. And what you have will never be duplicated. So why not share it? So sharing. The one work I would keep, definitely the Black Arch. The Black Arch, because it's just the exact, it represents my country and represent me. And I'm very much ingrained in both.
And Maria?
Well, I strongly share Basma's views about giving back. And I think in our part of the world, philanthropy is not as big as it is in the West, sadly, but we're learning how to do it. In my case, what I would do is I would ask my children to choose their favorite stuff. I say stuff because at the end of the day, it's stuff. I will donate some of it, and then with the rest, I've always had this dream of opening a foundation for sensory, I don't like the word disabled. I'm going to say children with sensory needs, and allow them to come to this institution, explore the art. I'll create tutorials, workshops, talks around the artwork. And this way, I feel that I would have allowed the maximum number of people to benefit from my collection. I think this is what I'll do. I'll have a lot of questions about this. Every time I mention it, people ask me, I don't have a plan yet. I don't know what works will go into this, but I'm determined to do that. So, yeah.
And then what's your one work?
This is a very difficult one, really difficult, because I'm attached to many things in life. So first of all, there's my country that I love dearly and that I miss every day. There's also I'm quite a religious person in a sense that I would love a work to be spiritual at the same time, but also a work about a woman artist, because I'm also quite big on women artists. So could I choose more than one work? This is a difficult one for me. I'll tell you at the end.
Yeah.
Let me have a
Raneem,
think.
do you have-
There's one work that an artist promised to do for my newborn baby, using her ultrasound instead of an X-ray. So I think because I just had my first newborn child, so I think that's the work I'll choose.
That's a nice. And Josh, either as a collector or maybe one of the favorite works from, you mentioned the Joseph Beuys or Gordon
I'm
Matta
not a collector, but when we moved into this fabulous apartment, it's like, oh boy, better put some art there. But I want to make a different point, and a couple points. One is, I'm not trying to tell you what to do here, because this legacy thing, if you're American and you're facing 60% estate taxes, it's a different story. And if you bought your Basquiat for $5,000 and your entire net worth is in that painting, you're going to have a different thought of, oh, let me give it to MoMA. So it works in a different methodology for that, where it no longer has that opportunity now. And that's why the art market is so strong, is people 70, 80, 90 years old, their collections are coming to the market because they are so valuable and the family can't afford to keep it or give it away. Now, the artwork that I would keep, you're right, it's Joseph Beuys, and I'm the one talking about all the big money. It costs $5. And it's called an intuition box. It's a little plywood box that he made that he thought should be in he said woman's, but everybody's kitchen. And it's a little box, a little line, it's on my mantelpiece, $5. That's, if my house was on fire, that's one I would take. Now, I would then rush to the Art Institute of Chicago and steal Gerhard Richter's Nudes Descending the Staircase if they were on fire, and say, let me bring that bad boy home.
And I think just one more question, because we didn't quite get there, about the idea of like supporting international institutions. This is a little bit of a selfish point, because I'm such a believer in supporting international Western institutions, helping them put Middle Eastern art there, because I think we all need to be represented in these important places. And so, Maria, I think you and I share this obsession and love.
Yeah, we are. I think because we live abroad and we're also attached to our countries of origin and to where we come from. So very quickly, to those who don't know what an acquisition committee is, it's a committee that's been put in place by a museum. And the members of this committee are people that belong to these different geographical regions that this committee represents. For instance, the committee that I co-chair with Faisal Tamer, Sarah's husband, is called the Middle Eastern Acquisitions Committee. It covers Middle East and North Africa, plus Turkey and Iran. And all the members on this committee are from the MENA region, including Alia, I think Dina. We have a few here. What happens is there is a financial ask, of course. Everyone contributes. And with this pot of money, the curators help us source out works from this region. Now, why is this important? Because the only way to have a decent amount of works from this region into the museum is through acquisitions committee. The only way you can represent your countries with an ES at the end is through the work of an acquisition committee. Otherwise, museums would be interested, but they would not have the fund, they would not have the drive, they would not have us.
And the drive and the people is what's so important. And actually to bring it back to, you know, us being here in this moment is the Tate has come to the last two biennales here, and one work now entered the collection. Of Tate, it's public, yeah. I'm in Zaydani.
Yes.
And, you know, to see a Saudi artist, you know, on the walls of the Tate, I think is an incredibly important thing. And as Basma said, you know, seeing art out there, you know, in the public realm, you know, is something you believe in deeply.
Very much, but we did work earlier with the artist. I worked with Ahmed, and we placed some artwork already before in some of the international museum, in the Metropolitan, in LACMA.
Because something you believe in.
Which I believe very much in that, and that was already before, and also with Maham Al-Louh in the MAC in Vienna, and we've done that. The Hirsham in Washington D.C. So this has been, you know,
kind of a part of the narrative.
Yes, exactly.
And that goes back to what you said about education, because also putting these works in a museum or on the wall expose them to many, many, many people
different
who wouldn't have seen them otherwise.
Yes, and also, you know, increase the curiosity about the area, about, you know, the places, about the history. Through these works, you know, a lot of that comes along with it.
Absolutely.
So, but we've been doing this program.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not.
What you said that I loved was about how you're trying to merge your two collections into one. And the critical thing, especially for artists in this room, is they want to be in the room. Picasso. Want to be in the room. I can say that black art fell into that problem for America.
Categorized,
And the goal is to be merged when it makes sense. And when you talked about merging your collection, that was, aha, she's got it.
Yeah, and now actually I'm doing a new project because I have a virtual museum, and in this virtual museum I do this kind of merging. Saudi collection, what does it speak to the international one? And actually the new show is by Sumaya Valley. She's curating my new show in the next edition. So it is very much focusing on that, to place us, you know, it is so important to place our region, you know, on the same level of the international world.
Yeah.
And do we have any questions? Oh, I think we have.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Mar Alamdar. I have a question for Basma Sulaiman and Raneem Farsi specifically, because all of a sudden, after 30 years, I realize I have a huge collection of art. I've been buying it out of love. But everyone who comes to my house and see the art, they say, look, Ammar, you have a gallery. You should document it. So I don't know if I would call myself a collector, but I do buy a bunch of art every year. Now, what is the next step to get this? I do have international artists too, but I care only for the Saudi arts. And in this case, what's the next step for us as collectors, if I were to call myself a
Document
collector?
it. Hagigi, the first step.
Archive.
Yeah, document it, so you can at least create an archive system for your collection, and then by default, by documenting it, you're going to realize that you're going to start evaluating it and understanding what's the story that you've been building from 30 years ago. You're going to understand your narrative. You're going to understand what's kind of the identity that you're starting to build for your collection. And that's, to me, that's the starting point. And then there are, you know, multiple of other layers that you can add on to that, in which you're going to probably want to start, you know, looking at exposing it, contributing some in some exhibitions that are happening, you know, notifying other people that exactly, you know, contributing it, and then start participating with these works in some of the exhibitions, whether locally or internationally, through the right channels. You can start doing that, and I feel like that becomes a cycle.
Blending as well, creating your own exhibitions, even your own exhibition in your own space. You don't have to do, you know, something big, but it just in your own space. But you have to understand the collection first, and then you can do that. But you can invite people, you can share it. Sharing is the most important thing.
And for
But
the
I
first
can
time,
imagine that, you know, in the next stages of perhaps of Art Week Riyadh, there will be private collection visits. You know, every kind of major art week in the world, you know, they invite people to different people's houses. You know, in Miami we see that, in London we see that, and so perhaps next year, you know, we'll be visiting you.
I'll send
As
you
well,
an
Ahmad,
invitation.
proper documentation is key. I feel like we miss that,
All
you know,
right,
the importance of it.
No one lives 100 years unless they're like dinosaurs. So after 100 years, what happens to this collection? That's the question. You've mentioned it, like it can be given to government galleries or exhibitions or museums, or to be
Donated.
inherited, because that's the thing that worries me all the time.
So you decide what you want to have, what do you want this collection to turn into in 100 years, whether, you know, amount of it to be, as Maria said, she said, if I had a chance, I would, you know, divide my collection, I'd turn some into a foundation, I would donate the other part of it.
And you can sell part.
Once you understand your
can,
collection.
you can sell as well part of it.
Exactly.
Okay, Maria.
I'm going to be in trouble for that. I think someone, Muhammad has it.
We have one question there, and then Mohammed Hafiz to finish it.
Is it working? Okay. Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's actually heartwarming to see the momentum of the art scene in Saudi, really. Very heartwarming. I was wondering, actually, my question is about some of the points that Maria and Josh mentioned, that we cannot only rely on institutional. Actually, the collector base has to grow, because the museums will fill up, and the only sustainable way for the artists in the long term is to actually increase the collector base significantly. I was wondering if you have ideas, and perhaps it's not a fair question only to collectors, because we need other players of the ecosystem to answer. But what is it that can be done in order to increase the collector base? Because the government at the moment is actually doing so much in a way that actually is amazing, and chapeau bas for all the effort that is being done. But this might have actually dynamics on the individuals, because that has an impact on prices. What we're seeing, and I'm personally humbly seeing as one of the collectors in the region of collecting Arab art, is that there is an overshoot sometimes and some sort of heating, and this does not help increasing the collector base. There's a feeling that, at least for some young artists, that they actually need to be treated as young artists. They're not mid-career, they're not established. How to create that balance so that the real collector base increases in a sustainable way, so that we have more people buying art and adding to your panel. Thank you.
I think that's one for Raneem.
I think accessibility is key, first of all. Allowing it to be accessible. I think Art Week Riyadh is a very good example, in which, you know, it's opening the gates to people to understand what are the works that are in certain galleries, etc., and also understanding of the market. Now, again, you have a lot of jewelry collectors in the kingdom, very, very, car collectors. But then again, with art collectors, there are, but not as much as we want. And when we dig into the main reason is a lot of people feel either shy to approach because they do not understand the market. They do not understand how to deal within that market. There are a few gaps. Again, thankfully, we have a few galleries, but we need more galleries. We need, by that, the kind of market players to take positions in the map, and then slowly the collector base will increase. If we look at the collector base today and 5 years ago, there is kind of a growth, and I feel like it is increasing with more education. Again, make it more familiar, make it more relatable, make it
and I think
accessible.
That, as somebody, I work with Art Basel very closely and for more than 15 years, first only with MENA and now also with UK, so two very different market profiles. And some of the most basic things is maybe, there should be, a workshop or a conversation here of how do collectors collect? And I think a lot of people, I have really good friends who get very intimidated. Oh, but what do I do? Like, do I just walk up to them? And do I ask the gallerist? And I'm like, yeah, and I'll walk through with them sometimes when I can, but obviously I can't always. And you need to just ask the question. And I'm sorry, some gallerists can be really not nice people and like, sit there, not Muhammad, but, just sit there at their booths and they look at you as you come onto the booth and they're like, what do you want? I mean, that's not a salesman.
That is very intimidating.
Yeah.
You're very right. You're very right.
That's not a salesperson. But you just have to keep on, anything in life, you keep on trying, and then you find that one great, lovely gallerist, salesperson that helps you in your collecting journey. There's no easy answer. And on that, the nice gallerist, Mohammed Hafiz, with a question.
But also, affordability to ensure that or relay the message to new collectors that art is not necessarily what's expensive is good. And I feel like there are efforts now from different galleries to come up with like Young Saudi initiative, Young Saudi artist initiative for to make more affordable artworks available in the market for people to start collecting gradually. Ahmed, your question?
Thank you for your time and sharing your experience. I'm going to try and make this very brief, focused on questions. It's a multi-part question. The first one, it's to all the panelists, and so we keep referring to collectors and collecting. And can it be just buying one artwork? We speak about art fairs and artist studios, but do we want maybe young buyers or serious buyers to maybe have a little bit of money or a lot of money and buy 2 or 3 works to put them at home? So I think, can you tell us when can you be privileged and hold the title of collector? And when can you be a buyer? And is there a difference? Number 1. Number 2, when you buy, you're obviously collectors and advisors, but how do you justify the price? How do you know that this is a good price for that, or a high price for this, or a low price for that? How do you calculate that in your mind and say, okay, $1 million for this is a steal, but 20,000 for that is overpriced? Number 3. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Forget the first one.
Let's wait for that. I think actually on the idea of value, and that was something that we were supposed to touch upon until we diverted into other subjects, which I love in a panel. Anyone who knows I've moderated. Josh, on the question of value, I think that's definitely, as somebody who works with collectors and also sometimes probably just helping people buy art.
Well, the art world that I'm in, which is one of many art worlds, so there's many, many different ones that get all the attention, cause all the money. We do not want it to be transparent. We want it to be opaque. And when you see that velvet rope in front of Studio 54, you're going, I want to get in. So that's what they're selling, is you're feeling, I made it. And that makes things expensive. Okay. And that's why they're rude to you sometimes in the galleries, because they're testing you for all this. And that when you've shown whatever and you're now inside the door and suddenly they're nice to you, you feel accomplished, and that makes things expensive. The last point I'll make is there's shopping, which is kind of what you were talking about. Buying is shopping. It's like I don't need another pair of shoes. I want them. You know, people every weekend are buying stuff they don't need. And then collecting, I mean, my ideal collection with one of my clients is just have one piece. Make it the greatest piece you can have.
I think for me, the value is in the eye of the beholder. So if there is a work that you're really, 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 really want to own, you're ready to pay anything for it, you will never feel that you've paid too much for it, ever. That's, for me, it's a real mark of passion and what the work really means. The value is intrinsic to what you give it.
And then in the sense that we can also talk about, you know, these words I'm throwing out for certain people in the audience who may not know, but please research the primary market versus the secondary market. And that's how, you know, a collector might assess, you know, whether or not a gallery is charging them the correct amount. But sometimes there is no secondary market for an artist, and some great artists do not have secondary markets.
If you buy it and you consider it to be worth zero and you're happy to have it forever, you won, right? A museum's job is to say everything in their collection is worth zero. Everything's equal, not the Cezanne was 200 million, so it must be shown even though it's a lousy Cezanne. Their job is to value it all at zero for the kind of values you're talking about, Maria.
And I think Basma.
Then, are you continuing on the same subject?
I think one last thought to wrap up.
I just want to go to Muhammad's first question when he said about when do you become a collector? Yesterday we were speaking with Jasmine and we said when do you become a collector is when you need the storage. Then you be someone said is that this is the moment you become.
And on that note, the Visual Arts Commission is developing a storage program very soon as part of Riyadh Art Week.
But you could also collect, I don't know, small works on paper or postcards that have been signed by an artist, and you could have 100 of them or 1,000 and you're satisfied. And that for me is a great collection.
I think it's a commitment.
It's a commitment.
It's a real commitment, by the way. Yani whether it's buying or collecting, it's a commitment that you have or you take upon yourself to,
And on that note, I want to...
Can I just say one thing, please?
Of course.
Shimon, I'm very sorry.
Take the mic out of his hand. If anybody's ever been on an airplane with Mohammed Hafiz, he gets on the PA on the airplane.
I'm doing a podcast with Mohammed. Tomorrow we're recording
so
it.
I'm going to have the mic for a whole hour. But wait, Karim. No, seriously.
One more.
Seriously. But I think since this is the first edition of Art Week Riyadh, and it is important to aspire to be collectors and really support the scene or own things that have value, emotional and financial, and we heard a lot of great things.
And we need shoppers as well as collectors.
And so we don't want to scare off the shoppers. We want, I think, people to come and try it and maybe buy one and see how it feels, and maybe because we're starting in a place where it's not as sophisticated as New York or London, or where you know the market is developed. We are developing this market, and maybe on behalf of the galleries and the collectors, it's come and explore and experiment and buy one thing and another. And if you agree with me or disagree, please, we want to hear from.
No, so I'm coming. You actually stole my conclusion. So on that note, we want the art world, and I speak for the art world in general because it's conversations we have all the time. We want the shoppers and we want the collectors. We want the institutions. We want the Visual Arts Commission. We want government support. We want responsible people in this world supporting the artists that are making our world a better place. And I think Saudi Arabia is perhaps one of the only bright spots in the world for this right now. And we should embrace it and support it. So make your legacy.
Thank you.
Make the things that you love and are passionate about. Make the cultural projects that are going to be part of your preserved heritage. And support the arts. Go shop and go collect.
Muhammad will give us 2 for the price of 1.
Just to let you all know, in 10 minutes, we're going to have another, I think, amazing session that really relates to this. It's called Meeting the Market, Insights from Gagosian, with Pepe Marchetti Franchi, Senior Director at Gagosian, and Amira Naza, Middle East Associate, also at Gagosian. But will you please join me in thanking all our amazing guests on stage. Thank you.